So without further ado, I would like to start this lecture, which I'm really honored. Not just thanking all the organizers and the new Center for Theology and Justice, but also it's symbolic that for this first lecture they invited somebody coming from the Catholic tradition, which is it shows the ecumenical approach very strongly. But if a Center for Theology and Justice, we need first to question what is justice about, because people think about justice differently, and that's why one of our problems. People think, for example, that it's just or it's fair to be focused only on our country. And well, if that means that other people in the world are struggling, well, I'm sorry, it's not our problem. And some people think they're not evil; they think that that's justice. So it's worth remembering all the different things that we have been saying about justice throughout the centuries. Now, the lecture won't focus, so don't worry. It won't be a focus on justice. But just a reminder, if you take the Aristotelian approach from justice that was further developed by Thomas Aquinas, you can say, well, that justice is what is due to other, or it's a virtue that is in between extremes in our conduct, or a more holistic approach if you take justice according to scriptures, and in the New Testament a specific characteristic of the kingdom of God. But in the modern times, if you can see on my left, all the things about justice that we have said in modernity is justice trying to achieve the best possible good for the greater people, or reduce injustices for the greater people. Is justice a kind of utilitarian approach, like John Stuart Mill and all his followers thought? Or is justice the reform of society, as Karl Marx proposed? Or is to get the rights of society right, or to perceive what kind of rights we have to, as a community, as a country, and as a global community as well, the rights that we have to defend? Or is it fairness and in social contracts, as John Rawls was proposing, or more about capabilities and freedom, as Amartya Sen proposed, or actually about dialogue in social contracts, or efficiency in criminal justice, or what is deserved to the other? And this is only a few, or perhaps the most important ones. So if you want to launch a Center for Justice and Theology, what kind of justice are you approaching? Well, I have good news. If you want to talk about justice, I would say, following Amartya Sen, for example, former Nobel Prize in Economics, his opus magnum was this book, The Idea of Justice, where he reframed the whole understanding of Rawls' theory of justice. And he said, hold on a minute. Instead of discussing just institutions or rules from which justice may ensure a kind of trickle-down effect. So we create just institutions, and then we will have a just society. What means we are seeking for a just society, an ideal just society that will never exist and has never existed. Why don't we take a different approach? Because, do you know what? Paraphrasing Amartya Sen, while we are discussing what is the just society that we have to seek and what are the correct rules that we have to ensure, people are starving. Migrants are dying when they want to cross the Mediterranean. Millions of people in Africa, they don't know if they're going to feed their families tomorrow. Many are struggling from unjust conflicts in Latin America, in the Middle East, and so on and so forth. So what Amartya Sen, from a complete secular and economic perspective, says, instead of discussing what is the best idea of justice, why don't we start from injustices? Why don't we approach the injustices that we have in front of us, and we try to reduce the injustices in the best possible way we can? And the way he suggests doing so is that we have to start comparing what is unfair. Why do we think this situation is unfair? Well, very easy. If you are born in England, you have a very, very high probability to succeed. If you're a woman and going to give birth, well, most of your relatives are already buying a present for you. If you are in Eritrea or in Sierra Leone, you have very little possibilities to succeed that simple human event that is giving birth. So if you start to comparing situations, you will get an idea of what injustice is without having a complete understanding or agreement of what justice is. And that's why while the poor suffer grave injustices today, and philosophers, policymakers, or even theologians are trapped in discussions about ideal scenario, Amartya Sen proposed, no, let's tackle this issue differently. Let's start from the reality of injustices. And this is the good news. This is so in tune with the gospel of Christians, of Jesus Christ. He didn't start a theory of justice or a theory of the kingdom. He started, to remember, well, you have to start with his first discourse, with the Beatitudes. He didn't start even with what kind of kingdom he was bringing. He started with the people he had in front of him. So this is where theology and justice is possible to connect. There are many people, including, for example, this famous economist and philosopher, who want to have a different approach to justice. And they want to have it not as an imposition, because when you see unjust situations, you want to impose your idea. Well, that would be unfair. The process of seeking justice would be also unfair. So if we want to tackle injustices through an inclusive approach, we need a process that is just as well. And he calls public reasoning, where everybody can participate. That is also very attuned with many Christian approaches, including the Catholic social teaching one, that you start with the poor. You want to include the poor on board. We cannot tackle poverty without bringing the poor into it, because otherwise it would be unfair, it would be patronizing. So let me tell you three very broad examples of unjust global situations. The first one is 60 million children under the age of 3 are malnourished in India. Now, if you think India is a very powerful and strong country in terms of macroeconomic development. And still, all this number of people, of children, are malnourished. 35% of the population in Latin America does not have access to drinkable water. Now, we are talking about the continent where we have more drinking water in the world, the sources of drinking water. Now, you tell me this is not unfair. You have to forget about for one moment the ideas that you have on justice. Is it not in your gut saying, we have resources to provide water from this continent to everybody in the world, and 35% of the population in that continent, they don't have access to drinking water? Is it not something moving inside? Or 1 in 8 children will die before the fifth birthday in sub-Saharan Africa, as I said before. Of course, 4 years ago was 1 in 5. So yes, okay, we are reducing this statistic. But as Pope Francis likes to say, people are not statistics, and still it's a scandal. So these are just 3 examples. But the question is, well, why do we have to help the malnourished in progressive India? And you see in BBC4 these debates. Well, many people say, well, why we British have to give aid to India? I mean, they're too rich. They have the highest percentage of rich people in the world. They don't deserve our aid. What I'm going to do with the poor in Latin America? It's too far away. Or why should I be bothering with the water there, with the Amazons? Or why do I have to help the horrendous inhumanities happening in Africa of child mortality? Well, I'm not a bad person, but I'm trying my best. But why do I have to invest my time, my energy, my resources there? It's a very relevant question that I'm asking. The reason is because you see the rise of nationalism all across the world. And many people say, no, my main focus of justice is to provide a just society to my country. And that means, well, I will try to take my country back, meaning I will try to obtain the most benefits from the negotiations with other countries. I'm just paraphrasing some languages that you are hearing every day. Now, people accept that. I'm not trying to be partisan in political parties, but the language that we are using is horrendous from a justice perspective. Forget about theology for a moment. We're just talking for a justice perspective. Now, why? Of course, you have reasons to argue that you don't have to be involved. And there are many reasons that we can provide from a Christian tradition. Well, the solidarity, the mercy, one family, and we will come back from that. But there's a more compelling argument, that is environmental injustice. And you say, what are you talking about? Well, it's quite easy. The environmental degradation that we are facing at the moment in every single part of the world is connected with what we do in every single part of the world. So this is not the poor children in sub-Saharan Africa or the Latin Americans that have corrupted governments that don't know how to administrate or manage the water resources, or the Indians that are too rich and too poor. I'm sorry. Environmental injustice affects us all. Absolutely every single person in the planet. And whatever we do here in England has consequences in Bangladesh. And whatever a Filipino does in his or her country affects us here too. So the environmental degradation, which is actually a disaster, is an opportunity to link all the causes of injustices together that we see, the symptoms, and go to the root. All these things or symptoms that we see of injustices, as for example the 3 I mentioned, why don't we go to the root of injustices, of all these injustices? In other words, they are interconnected. The injustices that we see in our society, or what in the Catholic tradition we synthesize in the cry of the poor, is inextricably connected with environmental injustices, which is the cry of the earth. So both cries are connected. Or put differently, you cannot tackle social injustices without tackling the ecological or the environmental one, and vice versa. You cannot work for environmental justice without linking it to social injustices, because the root is the same. Now, hold on a minute and trust me, I will talk about the root. But before that, and as in response to the ecumenical and generous invitation, I will also want to. will talk from my tradition, because that's where I come from. But I will talk a lot about Pope Francis's approach. And one of the things, this is one of the quotes of this document I'm going to talk about now, the Laudato Si, on the care for our common home, when he explains why injustices, social and environmental, are related. He still states that injustice is not invincible, because it can be overwhelming. All these problems that we have, okay, what do you do when you're overwhelmed? Personally, well, at least what I do is I disconnect myself. When I see this massive problem, well, disconnect. And I carry on doing my business as usual. But injustice is not invisible. And what's more, in a previous document called Evangelii Gaudium, the Joy of the Gospel, which is a very, very ecumenical, although it was written just for the Catholic Church, not as Laudato Si, that it was written for everybody. But in Evangelii Gaudium, he says that an authentic faith, of course Christian faith, always involves a deep desire to change the world, to transmit values, to leave this earth somehow better than we found it. Now you tell me if this is not a quote, a fascinating quote for the Center for Theology and Justice. How can we be Christians without this desire of changing the world? A deep desire, not just a little one, to leave this earth in a better way than we found it. And the earth, not just my community or my family. The earth, including the planet, including the environment. So, because of this interrelation of injustices, and because our faith urges us to respond, the Pope has written what we call in the Catholic tradition an encyclical, that is a letter to be circulated to everybody worldwide. And he says, and I want to read this, but remember that this is a Catholic Pope writing, that this is quite radical for the Catholic tradition. He says, I would like to enter into a dialogue. He doesn't talk about dogma, statements, anathema, sins, into a dialogue with all people, not just with the bishops or Catholic faithful, not even with people of goodwill, with all people, about our common home. In a nutshell, this is what, if you want to introduce this document, if you want to introduce this document, Laudato Si, this is what it is. It's an invitation to a dialogue about how do we live, how can we redefine our understanding of progress so as to progress in a just way and not in an unjust one. But for that, we need to include everyone. Now, very, very quickly, before entering into some details about justice and theology, and for those, apologies for those who are already familiar with this document, but it's worth reminding the title of the document, because it starts with Laudato Si. Laudato Si comes from St. Francis of Assisi, Laudato Si, O mi Signore. But the encyclical title is not Laudato Si, O mi Signore. It's just Laudato Si, which means praise be. This is on purpose. When Pope Francis, or the ones who know him, you know he has only one lung, so he speaks like a gentleman, you see. But this is not because probably he is, but he sounds more like a British person than an Argentinian. But because of that, he has developed a skill and a love for words. So every single thing, when he writes something, you have to pay attention. And the title of this encyclical was coming from him. The title, before we watched lunches, everybody was asking, how is it going to be called? Nobody knew. The title was reserved to him. Well, of course, the encyclical is not written by one person, but the title was his idea. Laudato Si, why he left aside Omni Signore? This is a statement right from the beginning. This is a faith statement. Yes, I'm going to talk about justice. Yes, I'm going to talk about environment. Yes, I'm going to talk about economics. But I'm going to talk from a faith perspective. And I'm not shy. But it's an inclusive faith. I won't put Omni Signore because I will leave aside many, many millions of people. Everybody can praise somebody, some God, or nature, or something. But you see, it's a very good way of presenting the Christian faith in an inclusive way without being shy of your own tradition. And the subtitle is On the Care, and this is a crucial word. Yes, he's talking about his reframing out the Catholic understanding, or probably the Christian understanding of stewardship, which was one of, and he apologizes in the name of all Christianity because the misunderstanding of stewardship as domination was part of the problem, or is part of the problem. That we think that we are at the center of the universe. We think that we are here and we are entrusted by God to dominate the world. Now, of course, Bible scholars will argue what the word domination, or how can it be translated in Genesis 1. And also many scholars will argue that the context is we are entrusted to take care of God's creation, representing God. So, but despite or aside from this debate, he won't mention even the word stewardship or all this debate about domination. He mentions the word on the title, care. This is an invitation to everybody. Everybody understands what care means. Nobody cares about something that he or she doesn't love. So, for example, some of you are ministers here. I'm a priest. I can be a good priest. I can go prepare my homilies, sort of, do my sacraments, attend some people, and I can tick boxes, and I can do my work properly. But that doesn't mean that I care for my people. If I do care for my people, I will walk the extra mile. I will do something else. I won't tick the box. The same with a teacher. For me, parents are good parents, not because we are not romanticizing parenthood, but good parents who care for their children, they're not just good parents. Or lovers. If you care, you will do something else. And this is justice what it's about. But ordinary people can understand that. I'm not talking about theologians now. We can debate about what stewardship means. We can debate about this word, how it's translated, the dominion in Genesis chapter 1. But ordinary people, they don't have time for that. If you go to a shanty town, people don't have time to debate this. But everybody would understand what does it mean to care for something or for somebody. And the post says, on the caring for our common home. Now, the word common here is very important to remember. We are common creatures. We have a common problem created by us. We are living in this era of Anthropocene. Well, he doesn't say these words, complicated words, but this is the first time in the history that human beings are causing us a very dramatic and serious impact, I would say, in our common home. But we are And in our common home, the Earth, our planet, there are goods that have been created for everybody, common destination of the goods. There are communities, we are called to be in communion. But we have a common problem that needs common solutions. This problem cannot be solved by one person, by British people, by Argentinians, by South Africans, by Chinese, or by the Americans. Just how prophetic this text is. What would happen if the United States withdraw the Paris Agreement? So this is really, really serious. This is a common home, and this is a common problem, and requires common solutions. And the word home, I said this before, but I like to repeat it because this for me is a masterpiece of playing with words. As some of you know, home in Greek is oikos. Oikos is the root for oikonomia, economics, the rule of the house. Is the root also for oikology or ecology, the web of lives, and from oikumene, our whole world. And this is a proposal of dialogue and of justice about economics, about ecology, and ecumenism, not just in the Christian understanding of ecumenism, but in a broader sense. So this title just reveals a little bit what the encyclica is about. But again, I cannot emphasize enough that because the Pope is coming from a Christian tradition, he says that, yes, everybody has to be included in this conversation about what's going on in our common home, because this affects us all. But the Christian tradition has something very special to contribute. And again, in the introduction of the encyclica, he quotes the Patriarch Bartholomew. Now, I don't know Baptist, Methodist, Anglicans, if you in a document will quote in the introduction of one of your main documents the leader of another tradition. But for us, it's quite radical. It's quite new. Especially because Patriarch Bartholomew asked to replace consumption with sacrifice, greed with generosity, wastefulness with a spirit of sharing, an asceticism which entails learning to give and not simply to give up. It is a way of loving, of moving gradually away from what I want to do to what God's world needs. It is a liberation from fear, from greed, and from compulsion. Now, this is at the beginning of encyclica. And it shows you again, what does it mean that we have to look at the roots of this social ecological crisis to seek for justice? This is all about. But again, we first need to start with reality. And we cannot, again, last year I was invited to Georgetown University to give a lecture about this. And there were two keynote speakers. The other keynote speaker was a representative of the Secretary of State. Thank God he was from the previous administration. But still, I was surprised that I still had to give account of what is happening. Now, the Pope doesn't enter into a technical debate. And this is one of perhaps of the lessons that we can learn how to link theology and justice. But he's assuming what the best science available is out there. More than 98% of scientists agree with this. Intergovernmental kind of climate change, he doesn't quote it, but has been working for more than 2-3 decades about this. More than 150 national academies of sciences in the world, including the Royal Academy of Science, have issued very, very strong statements about this, including the Pontifical Academy of Science of the Vatican. Now, he's saying, this is the best science available that we have. I'm not going to omit it. But also, what the Pope does is he's taking lots of what the bishops witness around the world. He brings it lots of what local bishops are saying about what's happening in their own diocese, which is amazing for a Vatican document. The first time it happens in 20 centuries of Catholicism. And he's saying, this is what we are seeing, but I'm not going to give details in order to debate about the technical things. I want to mention this, I'm paraphrasing both of us, because I want what the scientists and people of faith are witnessing. I want these things that we are seeing to let them touch us deeply, and provide a concrete foundation for the ethical and spiritual itinerary that follows. You see, and this is, again, for me, is a very, very wise approach to injustices that we are talking about. Let's not let's not enter at the beginning into useless debates about what we see. Let us see and let us allow ourselves to be touched by what we see. Because otherwise, how are we going to respond? And this is what we can summarize. Pollution, of course, and he explains different types of pollutions. This is affecting UK cities as well. This is not something that's happening in Dhaka. I went to Dhaka last year, I couldn't even breathe, or in Beijing. But this is happening. London has one of the highest proportion of pollution in Europe. And also pollution even inside homes for using different types of energy to cook is a massive problem in Asia, for example. But well, all types of pollution and caused by industrialization and by our own lifestyles, personal lifestyles. Global warming and climate change, loss of biodiversity. This is one of the most terrible things. And he links also the loss of biodiversity with the loss of cultural diversity. The problem of water is really, really, it's amazing. I have had the opportunity to travel to different countries last year to talk about this and discuss about this or listen, and I was amazed about the problem of water. Millions of people in poor regions, they don't have access to drinking water. Now, I go there, and when I go there, I drink from a plastic bottle. But then I say, but the ones who live there cannot afford to buy a plastic bottle. And not only that, when I'm there, I'm drinking from a plastic bottle, I'm throwing it away, and there's no recycling system. So I'm saving myself while I'm there, I'm polluting their environment while they cannot even drink, and they don't have waste disposal properly. Can you see I'm guilty. I'm not accusing the IMF of doing this. This is me. But the problem of water is serious, and the Pope reminds us that this is a right, and this is really linked to theology and faith. What is the first sacrament in Christianity? What is the symbol of the baptism? It's not water. Water is really a big problem. The decline of the quality of human life and the breakdown of society, weak responses, lack of leadership, conflicts, especially political weak responses, but also faith weak responses. And this is one word I would like to explain, rapidification. Some people heard about me saying, because, can I say an anecdote? So the draft of this document was almost ready. It took a while. There was a lot of pressure. There was a lot of expectations. And suddenly an assistant of the Pope came and said, yes, Your Holiness, we have we want to change one word. And can you imagine the face of the Pope? One word. I mean, what kind of word do we want to change? This word, rapidification. I said, what's wrong about the word? Well, it doesn't exist. What do you mean? Well, it doesn't exist in Spanish. Of course, it doesn't exist in English. It doesn't exist in French, in Italian, and blah. And he said, okay, rapidification, yeah. Well, change any other word, but rapidification, just leave it. Put it in inverted commas. Why so important, this word? Because it condenses a lot of things that require lots of sentences. Now, I was talking with some of you before coming here. Main top, one of the things we have in common, we're all busy. We're all very busy. We're all tired. We're all rushing. Now, we are all jumping from one thing to another. I'm not saying that it's necessarily bad, but this is becoming a way of living. And I'm the worst of it, I can guarantee you. I don't know how to take days off. I don't know how to stop. But this kind of life, which unfortunately is for everybody, even for the poor people now, the rich people, middle class, whatever. When you apply this to a system of development which includes economics and the exploitation of natural resources, that means that we do the same with the earth. Now, we can take pills, or we can pray, or we can do some things to cope with our rapidification. Or you can have good friends, or I don't know. Now, our common home, the earth, just reacts. The rapidification that we are imposing on the natural world is damaging the entire planet. And there's no road back unless we change that imposition. And that's why scientists said that we are living in this Anthropocene context. And again, this is not an invention of myself. You see, this is one of the covers of The Economist of last year. It's the first time in the history of humanity that we are entering into this. Now, this is not to fear, but we have to be aware of this. And many people, unfortunately, they are not. And that's why we are going beyond what scientists say. This is not Pope Francis, but the scientists say these planetary boundaries. We are going beyond the planetary boundaries. We are red, already red. And some politicians are still saying, I'm not sure that if this is worth exploring. But not even politicians. You go to, I don't want to mention any development agency, but let's say mine. So you visited one of CAFO's development projects in South America, and you can see the development, the manager of the project there on the field. He said, well, for example, in São Paulo, they have massive poverty there. And when you start talking about this problem of the environment, ecology, he said, well, I don't care. Well, he doesn't say I don't care, but I need to feed these people. Well, but the problem is that if you don't care, the way of feeding these people is to destroy the Amazons. And it's a vicious circle. But you can feel the tension of all development projects. Now, if this tension is in Christian aid and development agencies, can you imagine in a nation agency when you plan economics? Now, the good thing about this proposal of the Pope, and I was saying is radical, is he mentions all these things that we are seeing to touch us deeply. But now, in a way, in different words, paraphrasing the Pope, what we see is not enough. I want to go to the root. To tackle injustices, we need to go to the root, to have a proper diagnosis. One of the worst things that happened in the last decades is that we had the wrong diagnosis. And the famous case, I mean, to put a bit light case, to remember the famous case of Lesotho in the early 80s, you know, those working in development. So it was founded by the World Bank and the IMF. So it was founded to promote local communities. It was a disaster because, one, they didn't ask local communities what they needed. Two, just for example, so one of the projects was to avoid women going to the wells to take water, because then they had to carry the wells. And so the people went there and said, oh, this is horrible. Now we're going to build like a lime pump, water. So the problem is that was the only chance that the woman had to go outside the household to create a bond, and so it was a disaster. Anyway, so if we don't have the diagnosis right, we don't get justice right. And he mentions some. I'm not going to delve deep into all of them, but the prevailing technocratic paradigm is one. So the technocratic society that is controlled by technology, and technology is controlled by the powerful, misplaced the idea of free will. So everything that we can do is good, insofar as technologically we can repair it or cope with it. This in turn leads people to belittle their capacity to seek for what is truly good for our common home, and to be indifferent to the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth. It helps people to be trapped into the idea of the logic of dominators and not into the logic of care. Now, he's not saying that technology is wrong, but the technocratic paradigm is one of the problems. The myth of perennial progress, this I can guarantee you is one of the worst things that we are facing at the moment. The myth that we can grow and grow and have more and grow. And I'm not talking about countries only. Think about yourself. We have this mind. In our family, our aim is to have more, and we believe that this is better. Well, the problem is, in the current situation, it's not good. It's not fair. So how are we going to cope with this mentality? Globalization of indifference. Never in the history of humanity we have been so connected. And we are not touched. Lack of political will. Throwaway culture. We produce unjustly, exploiting without caring for natural resources. We trade unjustly, leaving many, many people in the trade system poor and unfair. We buy unjustly, and we waste unjustly. So you see, all these problems are related to justice. The production, commerce, purchasing, consumption, and waste. And this is a throwaway culture. If you look at the enormous amount of waste that we generate in this country, it's embarrassing, to say the least. And this is fomented by a consumerist lifestyle. And again, many countries, their economy depends on consumption, so you can see that we are completely trapped. Now, going back to the interconnectedness and injustices, the Pope says we are also, he proposes a terminology that is integral ecology. Integral ecology means to integrate the development of humans, integral development for all, with what we call the ecological or environmental care, to integrate them. They are integrated. But for that, you can see, so it's a paradigm able to articulate the fundamental relationships of the person. The relationship, if we are a believer, with God, the relationship that we have with oneself, with ourselves, the relationship that we have with other human beings, the interpersonal, the relationship we have with the society and with creation as a whole. This is a holistic understanding of beings, and therefore the holistic understanding of justice, because justice should be promoted in every single dimension of these relationships. Now, they are not separated. So you see here, society and nature are not separated. Politics, economics, and environment, personal dignity and common good, inter and intergenerational justice are not separated.
I'm watching the time. 5
minutes? Yep. Okay. Culture and lifestyle, cry of the poor and cry of the earth, they're not separated. So, the final section, thank you for that. So, let me in 2 minutes give you another example. The roots of the injustices are, I would say, and this is me understanding the Pope, the individual, socioeconomic, religious, ecological, and the logic. Individuals that are non-compassionate, self-centered, and indifferent. Socioeconomic development programs that are partial, not development for all, that are from above and generates inequality. Religious relationships that are spiritualistic, indifferent from what's happening in the world, or idolatrous, that we work only in justice without receiving the grace of God, inspiring. Ecological, anthropocentric, we are the center of the world, utilitarian mindset and technocratic paradigm. The logic of domination and reciprocity, the market, is the one that prevails. But what the Christian tradition proposes is persons that are compassionate individuals, acting socially in solidarity. An integral understanding of development for all from below, which includes participation. Integral spirituality. This is massive in our churches. It's a massive issue of justice. Integral spirituality, when we can integrate the church and the world, faith and worship with peace and justice. Integral ecology, the being biocentric, respecting ecosystems. And the prevailing logic is the logic of receptivity and care, not of reciprocity. He's not sidelining the reciprocity by saying the prevailing one is the receptivity. Why? Because we receive this earth and we want to transmit it. And the last thing I will say, because people will ask, and so what? So what? Well, the Pope proposes like values for action that are based on dialogue, education, and spirituality. Now, I would skip the dialogue because it would be too political, but I will talk about education a little bit, because this is really radical. And you all have the capacity to educate in your churches, in your schools, in this center, whatever. So when the Pope talks about the education or the ecological education, he doesn't propose a scientific information or awareness or prevention. He is proposing a new way of thinking that can change our mindsets. This logic of domination and reciprocity of the market can understand a new understanding of relationships with others and with nature, a culture of love and care that can enhance a cultural revolution. He mentions this word. Oh, the Pope mentioning this word. Cultural revolution. That promotes a new universal solidarity. It's not enough the one we have now. An intergenerational justice. Now, the Christian tradition has a wonderful, wonderful background to promote this. I'm taking two very, very concrete examples of the Catholic tradition, but you have plenty of examples in every single Christian tradition. Little way of love. Every single gesture of love counts. Saint Teresa of Lisieux. But love is also political and social, like Oscar Romero. But if we want to change this radically world, we need conversion. Now, how are going to people to convert this? How are going to nations to stop promoting consumption if they need that money? How are we going to stop our rapification? Well, we can propose conversion because we know how to do it. Not necessarily we do it, but we know from Revelation how to do it. And that's the motivation for change. The motivation of the scientific motivation, political, economic, is not enough. We need something that can inspire people to convert themselves. And guess what? The Pope proposes the religious narratives as an inclusive and radical way of changing the world. Say, and what about those who are not religious? Doesn't matter. Religious narratives can be, if well introduced, universal enough to touch the root of the injustices, which is all the relational aspects of humans, in a kind of, as if it were a piece of art. In Argentina, when I was growing up, we used to read some things about Shakespeare, or Graham Greene. And we were 12,000 kilometers from here. But our classic art, or in any school in the world, you study Michelangelo. Well, the Pope is reminding us that we can introduce religious narratives in this way, in a universal way, not imposing our dogmas, but in a way that can trigger the imagination to think the world differently. And this is possible. And you have an example if this Genesis 1 to 11, including the story of Noah. In one word, integral spirituality, is connected with integral development and integral ecology, is the way to transform the world, to motivate people to change, to challenge the current mindset, and to create a new understanding of relationships, including others and not excluding them. And this is crucial to justice. In conclusion, what I was trying to emphasize today is that it's not, this is the Pope, we have to buy. Laudato Si as a document, for one of the first times in the Catholic tradition's history, is a document for all. It's the first time, as a pastor, as a priest, it's the first time that I recommend an encyclical to other people. Because it's readable, but it's prophetic. It's really prophetic. It's not just a description of social issues with principles that are all good. Previous one. This is prophetic in a way. It denounces what is wrong. It proposes a different understanding of challenging injustices, but it claims for an urgent change. We need to do this urgently. We don't have time. We don't have 50 years to tackle this. And the way he proposes is to love and care for our common home. It brings hope. It's not overwhelming. How many messages in our churches are hopeless? Are words that people are saying, oh, how many? I can tell you many of my messages that are hopeless, but we need to be self-critical about this. We need to inspire people to change, not just to tell them what to do, and inspire for this eco-conversion, integral conversion, that is personal, our lifestyle, especially the lifestyle of people here in rich countries, but it's also structural, organizational, not just national. Structural means our churches as well. I think that most 99.9% of the Christian churches, including my church, we need to change. We need ecological conversion. Can you imagine if all the churches in the world, suddenly we start to give signs of this integral ecology and conversion? Can you imagine the impact that will have in the world? God will ask us for this. God will make us responsible if we don't do it. But the encyclical brings hope and motivation for transformation, which I think is key to respond to the injustices as we started. It's key to promote actual sustainable development. This is the sign of the Sustainable Development Goals. We cannot propose sustainable development goals without a motivation for change. Now, the motivation for change won't come from a statement of the UN. It will come from religious communities, other religions as well, but especially from Christians. We cannot give account of what the Buddhists or the Muslims do, but we are responsible for our churches to transmit this message. And again, this message is not just from Pope Francis. You embrace it, paraphrase it. You say that your leaders say it. The Pope doesn't care about that. So that's not copyright here. What matters is that we need to change radically the way we live, the way we produce, we trade, we consume, and we waste. We need to do it radically and quickly. And our faith has something to say about it. Very, very important, because it helps us to see things differently. And for the Reformed churches, is it not music for your ears that the Catholic Church is saying, religious narratives? Religious narrative, but not to impose the religious narrative. Religious narratives to inspire people to promote justice. Thank you very much.
you, Father. Thank you for your address to us today. You've taken us to the roots of what justice and injustice are about. You've challenged us in the way in which we engage and given us a wider vision, not simply to be a force for change within the church, but to use our Christian tradition, our narratives, our stories, our images as a way of seeking to change the whole of the society of which we're a part. Thank you very much for giving that. Very much connecting faith and action, as it says on the banner there.